Hi everybody, this is Professor West, and in this video we're going to start talking about how to manipulate tables in your database. So I invite you to follow along with me, or you can just watch either way. So a table is the heart of the database. All of the information is stored in tables in your database. So let's go ahead and open one. This is the one that comes with the very first segment in Access in your data files in the class. So if you haven't already downloaded it, please do. And if not, I'm just going to double click it to open it. If not, you can just follow along. Once again, there's the security thing, but I trust it because it's from the school. So let me click on any one of these. These are 3 different tables that have already been set up. This one's called Appointments. I'm going to double click on it, and that's going to bring up that table. This one's called Treatment Costs. And this one's called Veterinarians. This is obviously for a vet. So, let me just explain to you what's going on real quick. This is a veterinarian's table, so this is the doctors, the vets, and it has each one's ID, first name, last name, office phone, cell phone, email address, all this stuff about that person. Now that's one record. Remember we talked about this before. One record is all the information on one row. And that's not going to change. I mean, we could literally go in and change it. Like if I decided, oh, his last name's not Black, it's Block or something like that, I could change it. But otherwise, there's no point in this database where that information is going to get separated off of this row, off of this record. Now, we can separate it in other places to display it, but in the record itself, it's going to remain intact. So the treatment costs, this is how much it costs to do stuff. This is the treatment number, the treatment itself, the animal type, how much it costs, and then the appointments. And notice that I already had appointments open. When I double clicked on it, it didn't open a second one. Like right now, I've already got treatment costs open up here in this tab. So if I double click on it, it just goes to that tab. It doesn't open another one. So let's go to any one of these. Let's go to appointments if you're following along. And I can talk about a little bit about what is going on here. So as I mentioned, each row is a group of information we call a record. One thing that's incredibly important, you have to understand this. There has to be a unique ID somewhere in your table. We always put it in the first spot. In this case, it's appointment ID. And see how it just says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That's just how it does by default if you don't tell it to do it differently. The reason is no record can have the same ID as another. If that's your unique key, if that, like we call it the key. It has to be unique. It has to be a way to differentiate it from all the other records. So there's no other record in this group called number 1. Now, depending on what you're creating this database for, some people use social security numbers, some people use telephone numbers, some people use employee ID numbers or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of different things you can use. You don't have to give it a generic 1, 2, 3. In this one with the veterinarians, they each have their own ID. So this is William Black, his is B01, and Teresa Gomez is G01. I guess she was the first one that started with a G, so she's G01, and he's the first one that started with a B, so he's B01. Your email address is another good example, because whatever your email address is, you're the only one in the world with that email address. If you include the entire email address, of course. Like right here, wblack@newmail.com. Nobody else has that full thing. There could be a wblack at something else. And there could be other stuff at newmail.com, but there's no wblack@newmail.com other than William Black. So that could also be our key. So it just depends on what you want to make your key, but we'll talk about that more later. So as I've mentioned before, each item in this record is called a field. Each column is a field. So this is the first name field. This is the last name field. No matter how many I put in this, it's always going to be last names. No matter how many I put in this one, it's always going to be the office phones, and so forth. In different tables, those are different. Here's treatments. Well, these are always going to be treatments. And you can set it up, we'll talk about that in a minute, so that like with costs, it's dollars. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Changing the information in a field is extremely easy. If I decided I wanted to change this one, let's see. Okay, this one says heartworm. Well, let's try to find one that wouldn't, it doesn't really matter. Okay, this one right here says feline. Let's say that's supposed to be canine. All you have to do is click in the cell and delete it. You can use the delete keys, or you could double click in the cell. Either way, delete it and type what you want. C-A-N-I-N-E. Now, that's a canine. As soon as I move off of this field, it automatically saves it. So if I close out my database right now, that one's saved. Let me put it back. I decided, no, I didn't mean to change it. F-E-L-I-N-E. Now, if I close out the database right now, that is not saved because I haven't moved off of it yet. So you either have to move off of it, or you can go up to the file and tell it to save. Either way, it's a good idea whenever you're going to close it to save anyway, just to make sure, but now it's saved. Now if I close it out and come back in, it'll be back to feline. Okay, I've been clicking on these cells, but you can also use the arrow keys. So I'm pushing right, I'm pushing up, I'm pushing down, I'm pushing left, whatever you want to do to get to the right one. Sometimes, the way they are set up, it could be a little difficult if they don't have a whole lot of room on them to get to the one you want. It could be easier just to use the arrow keys instead of keep moving the mouse over there. So it's totally up to you. It doesn't matter. It's the exact same way either way. When I get right here, I could just literally start typing feline. Oh wait, no, I want that one to be canine. If you decide you need to delete a record, that's very easy. Come over here to the left and click on it. That highlights the entire record, just like I've showed you before. And then you go up to Home. Make sure you're on the Home tab. If you're on something else, if you're on one of these other ones, you can't delete it from there. All these change when you click on a different tab. So come down over here into this section where it says records at the bottom, right in the middle, and you would click delete. And if you click it, it's going to come up and ask if you're sure you want to delete it. I'm going to click no, and I'm going to explain why. It is not very common to delete records from a database like that. The reason is because these tables, we link them together. So appointments, let me show you what I'm talking about real quick. This person's appointment, here's their ID, and here's their veterinarian, and here's their treatment. Their treatment's T3. So they're coming in for a T3. Well, if you come down to the treatments, T3 is a wellness exam. So if I deleted this record, then this one would say they're in for T3, but it would not bring up the information for the treatment because it would no longer exist. So this is a very, very important that you understand that these tables are all linked together, and deleting a record from one could mess up the others. So most of the time we can change them, that's fine, but unless it's a brand new record that you just created, it's usually a bad idea to delete it. You just don't want to do that. Let's talk a little bit about creating a new record. If you want to create a new one, just come over here. I'm sorry, a new field. If you want to come over here to the very end, see where it says click to add? You can literally just click, and it'll tell you what your different options are. So I could tell it short text. That's a small field for text, just like all of these are using text. Text is very important. It's important that you understand that it's not just letters. These can be text also. Text has numbers in it. Numbers are just numbers. Now, I need to explain something else here. If I were going to put in say See, I didn't click anything there, so it doesn't want to let me move off. If I was going to create one for phone numbers, I would not use a number. Even though it's all numbers, I would need to use short text. And I'll tell you why. Let me go ahead and put this in. I'm just going to show you PHONE. I'm just going to leave it like that. If I put this as a number, then when I type the phone number in and I say 555-1234, it would see that as a mathematical formula. And it would try to say, okay, well, 555 minus 123 is, and it would change that to the answer. If you're putting phone numbers in, you don't want it to do that. So you have to make sure it's text. If I would have put this as a number, then that would have just changed this entire thing to somewhere around 700, whatever that answer is. I don't know. I can't do that off the top of my head right now. But it's very important. The same goes for Social Security numbers. If you're going to put Social Security numbers in your table, make sure you put it as text. And any other number that you don't want to automatically calculate has to be text. Now that I've got it in there, I could go in and I could make some changes, but I'm not going to. Now I can delete this column the same way I tried to delete that row a minute ago by hitting delete key here. I selected the whole thing by clicking at the top, and I'm going to hit delete. It's going to say, are you sure? And I'm going to say yes. I can do that because I know I have not linked anything to that number yet. So it's totally fine. Sometimes you may find yourself in a position where you need to change a number of different things at one time. Let's say I don't want it to say feline anymore. I want it to say cat now. So make sure you're clicked on the Home tab and then click on the Replace. Sometimes it takes a second to find it. There it is. Right here where it says Replace. If I click on Replace, it automatically puts whatever cell you're in. But I can change that. I can put feline here. See where it says find what? Basically, this is going to do a search, and it's going to find the word feline. What do I want to replace it with? Well, I want to replace it with the word cat. Do I want to do it only in the current field or anywhere in the document? I'm going to tell it anywhere in the document. And when I click, now this is important. If you're going to do it like this, you might want to do them one at a time. When I click Find Next, it's going to find the first one that says feline. And it highlighted it here, and now I've got two choices. I can either click Find Next again and go to the next one, or I can tell it to replace. If I tell it to replace, then it changes it from feline to cat. It's very important for you to understand that there is a replace all here, but it is a bad idea to use it unless you are absolutely 100% certain that the word feline does not appear anywhere else. See right here where it says feline vaccines? What if that was something else? So let's say right now I decide, oh, I don't want to change this one. I'm going to click next. It would just leave it and go to the next one. I'm going to stop that and I'm going to put it back because I don't want to change my database. I'm going to put that back so it's not saved. So one time I had a friend who was doing databases, and he was changing a person's information, and he did the replace all, and it turns out that person's, the information they were changing, I don't remember exactly what it was. Let me just say, for example, maybe it was part of his name. The guy didn't realize that it was in the other stuff as well, so it changed it in all the columns, all through the database, right in the middle of the words. Like, for example, if his name was Roe, R-O, it would have changed right here. It would have changed that to whatever we were changing it to. So, unless you're paying attention, you might not realize that it no longer says microchip. Now it would say Mike Dave chip or whatever he changed it to. So, doing the replace all is a very bad idea unless you are 100% certain that that name does not appear anywhere else. So just keep that in mind. Just it's typically a good idea to go through them one at a time if you're going to use that. Okay, let me show you a couple more things about fields, about changing and adding fields, because we're going to do that here. Go ahead and come back up here and click on Add Field. I want to show you some of the other options now that I've explained the short text and the number pretty good. There's large numbers, which is for big numbers. There's currency, date and time extended, which is a bigger way of showing the date and time. Yes, no, this is going to put a checkbox, and some other stuff here. I'm going to put the yes, no. And let's say my field, I'm going to call it mailer or ad. Maybe I'll change that to advertisement, AD. So, if this was a person, or I'm going to send out ads if they want it. So I would just click a checkbox. Yes, this person wants it, that person wants it, and so forth. Now these aren't actual people, so you just have to play along for a sec. If I decide that I need to change from this field type to a different one, it's a little bit more involved process. You have to go up to the top up here, and we're going to click the fields. Oh, let me highlight the whole column first. Let's make sure we're on fields. And over here you see where it says data type. This is going to give us more options. So for data type, if I click this little drop down, it brings up all of our original choices. I could do short text, I could do long text, I could do numbers. Let's say I've decided, oh, I want that to be a number now. So I'm going to change that to a number. By default, it changes everything in it. So if it was checked, it gives it a -1, and if it wasn't, it gives it a 0. Now I can delete all that. I can change all that myself. So, but let's say, okay. So let's say that in addition to being a number field now, I want to make some modifications. I want to say, let me change it again. Let's say I want it now to be, Okay, you know what? This is just getting ridiculous. You must enter value in the treatment cost. That's because it added a new row, which gave it a 0, and it's not allowing me to. Alright, you know what? For temporary sake, I'm just going to put a 10. I'm going to delete that. It didn't accept it because it wasn't there. What? Must enter value in the treatment cost treatment number field. Okay, so now it also needs one over here. So I'm just going to put something here for now. This is actually what I was getting to, was that you can set it up so they have to enter certain things. I'm going to delete this record that it accidentally created. Yes, I'm sure. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change this one now. So let's say I want to go back to text, but I don't want to just let them enter any text. This is going to be a zip code field now. So I want to go through and make sure that they enter, I'm sorry, not a zip code, a state. I'm going to keep it simple and do a state. I want to make sure that they enter the actual state abbreviations. So to do so, we're going to come over here to the right and we're going to click validation. This is going to set up the rules for what's going to be in here, and it's going to validate it when you enter it. So validation, I have some choices. I can do field validation rule, field validation message. I can do a validation rule or validation message. Each one explains exactly what it is. This says create an expression that restricts the values that can be entered into the field. This one, validation message, says set a message of what's going on. You just saw that a second ago. where it said that you have to enter a number here. Somebody set up that there has to be a number here. That was the rule. And then the message was the one that kept popping up telling me there had to be a number here. So we use these two together in order to make sure that the person understands what's going on. So I'm going to start with the validation rule. So click on the field validation rule, and right here is where you can do the validation. And you have several choices. If it's a number, and I wanted to make sure that they enter something greater than 0, for example, like for this cost, it wanted me to enter a number, I could put the greater sign and 0, and that just tells them that whatever they enter has to be greater than 0. Since this is a text field, I'm not going to do that. Since this is a text field, I want to make sure they enter text. Unfortunately, there's not an easier way to do this. So, I'm just going to walk you through it. If you want to make sure that they enter the proper state abbreviation, put a quote and do a state abbreviation. Like AL, I think, is Alaska. And an end quote. Space, the word or. And notice when I started to type that, it came up thinking that it knew what I wanted. It's trying to help, but in this case it wouldn't have helped. And then if I do another one, AK maybe, or I can't think of all the states in order, so I'm just going to throw a few in there. TX for Texas, or CA for California. Okay, let's say those are the only 4 that I could enter, because I don't want to type 50 out. So what's going to happen is, when you type something into this box, it's going to come here and it's going to say, okay, did they enter AL? No, they didn't. Oh, okay. Or did they enter AK? No, they didn't. Oh, okay. Or did they enter TX? Yes, they did. Oh, okay, well then it's valid. If it gets to the end and it didn't find it, then it would come up and say that's not valid. So right now, yes, I want to keep the new setting. So right now, it will only accept those 4. But I'm going to go in and add a validation field message also. And my field message is going to say, enter, let's see, state abbreviation. I'm just going to put ABBV in caps. And then I'm going to put something like example TX. And that way, when the person enters something, if they try to enter, I don't know, New York, and they put NY, when you move, it's going to come up and say, oh, you got to enter the state abbreviation in caps, like TX. Now, that doesn't really help here because they tried to enter a state. If this was really the database, then I would have entered all the states, so that wouldn't have triggered it. But in this case, it would. So what I would really want to do is, I would want to set my validation rule to say, must be TX or whatever else I had entered. I can go back into the field rule and see. So I can just literally copy this. So I just highlighted it and held down the control and hit C. And then I'm going to go back into the validation, and I'm going to come here and put Control V, and hit OK. So now, if they type New York, NY, it's going to come up and says enter state abbreviation in caps, and it's going to show those 4 that's the option. And that gives them a better understanding of why it didn't work. So if you enter TX, it just goes on to the next one. This gives you a lot of power over this database. Now let me show you something else. If they enter TX, lowercase, oh, I didn't tell it to be case sensitive. Okay. It should have. I'll have to figure that out. Anyway, so the important thing is, let me go ahead and get rid of this one. And, oh yeah, I gotta go into the home and tell it to delete. I do it the right way. Always have to do things the right way in the databases. But there's other options that you could have used. Like, for example, I could have told it here in this field that everything has to either be feline or canine. Can't be anything else. That way because the person that's entering stuff might enter dog instead, and I would want it to come up and say, oh, you can't enter dog, it has to be feline or canine. So there's a lot of different things that you can do in order to make sure that it's exactly the way you want. So let me go over just a few more quick things. Let's say sometimes when you create these, they're not big enough. Obviously here there's plenty of room. Here there was almost not enough room. If you come up here to the line between them, see how my pointer changes? I can click and hold, and I can make that field as wide as I want. So that gives me more time. If I had feline vaccinations for rabies and blah, 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 I could move that over to give myself plenty of room to see it all. You can do the same thing over here for each record, but there's something else going to happen. If I move down and give it, say, that much room, it's going to do that to every record. It keeps everyone exactly the same height. And the reason is because every record has all the same information. It doesn't do that with the rows or with the fields because this field has different information than this field, so this field doesn't need to be the same size as this one. This one's tiny. It needs to be small. This one needs a lot more room. But as far as the records go, each record needs the same stuff, so if this one needs to be taller, then this one needs to be taller. Now, sometimes you may run into a situation where you don't need a field to show up. So you need the information, but let's say there's all this extra stuff in here, and let me go to the veterinarians, for example. Right now, all this information is showing up in my database when I go to look for them. If I don't want all of that to show up, like let's say I don't need the street address to always show up, I could right click on it and I could come down and tell it to hide the field, and now it's gone. I can do that to the next one. I can hide any field that I want. I can go back and tell it to unhide the field and see how it comes up with this unhide columns. The two that I told to hide are no longer selected. So I can choose, oh, okay, I want those two to show up, but I could take this one off and this one off and this one off and see how they're disappearing. Oh, no, wait, I need those. Yeah, I want those to show up. It's important to understand that does not delete the field, it just hides it so you don't see it here. Sometimes there can just be too overwhelming amount of information here for you. Another thing, let me show you something else. Notice in this example that every other line has a light gray background. That's to help you read it, because especially when these get longer, it makes it a whole lot easier to keep track of if every other one's a slightly different color. But this is just the default. You can change that if you want. You can go back to the Home tab, come over here to the right where it says Text Formatting, and you can click this little arrow. And see where it says Alternate Background Color? Well, maybe I want my alternate background color to be a bluish color. Well, on the one that I had selected, it just changed it. If I select them all, I gotta get off of that. If I select them all by clicking this thing right here in the middle on the top, I can come back and tell it, oh, for the alternate, I now want all of them to be this color blue for the alternate. And see how now they're all blue and these are darker and these are lighter. I can change it again if I change my mind. I don't want, or I want the background color. Let's say I want the background color to be white for sure of my table. You got to play around with this stuff some because it's not always exactly the easiest. I kind of like sticking with the light gray for the background, so did I not select it? Okay. Maybe I don't want that one. Okay. Anyway, so it's something you got to play around with, and you can figure it out on your own. There's grid lines here if I want to change the grid line colors. So right now, and it shows you here what it should look like. So now they're all kind of this orangish color. So anyway, it's just something for you to play around with, so you can make it however you like it. Even when you change it, notice there's still lighter colors and darker colors. It's just not quite as easy to read this way. So, a couple more things. Real quick, back to changing it. If I click on the, up here at the top, that highlights my whole table still. And I can come in, and I can tell the grid lines to be shown in horizontal. If I uncheck that, see how they disappeared? Verticals up and down. If I uncheck that, they disappear. So if I click OK right now, now there's no grid lines. Oh, no, I want my grid lines. And you can play around with these. This is flat right now. If I do raised, then it's going to do it like that. If I do sunken, you can do it like that. Totally depends on how you want it. You can put a border around the entire one or just the column headers. You can tell it to be solid or dashes or short dashes. If I choose short dashes for the database border for the column header, then you can't really see it on there because the way it's set up. That's okay. Just stuff for you to play around with. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.